Hi, this is Catherine, and this is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is mixed berries and hibiscus herbal tea from Ahmad Tea. It's the first time I'm having it. It's yet another berry blend, but I don't know. I've just had a feeling for berry blends lately. I don't know. You get moods, right? I like this little mug. I've shown this to you guys before. It's one of those, I forgot her name now. It's something Cicely Mary Barker. I don't think that's right, but something along those lines. Wait up. Nope, can't read it upside down. I'm not toasting or whatever. But I chose this one because of the fairies, and the first book I'm going to talk about today is there's a lot of mention of fairies throughout the book, and so I thought it was apropos. So I'm doing something that I see all the time on BookTube. Often I do check-ins, weekly, twice a month check-ins, whatever. And this is basically the same thing, but I'm seeing a lot of the Friday reads, and that just sounds so nice. It's Friday, you're relaxed now, gonna go into the weekend, and you're thinking about all the books you've read this week. So I thought, okay, I'll do that today. And I've had some good reading experiences this week. The big star is my reread. Because I read this book, and I mentioned this before on this channel, but I read this book close to 30 years ago. The start of a series, which is one of my favorite series ever. The top got a little bent. It wasn't like this before. I'm such a perfectionist that it's going to annoy me. But anyway, this is Anne of Green Gables. This is not the edition I had 30 years ago. In fact, aside from the next book in this series, I can't seem to find the rest of the series in my apartment. I thought I had them, maybe I don't. So if I'm going to continue this year, I may have to go to the library like I said I wouldn't, but you know what? 1 month at a time. And I thought maybe I'll just read this one and maybe another one, and then maybe that'll be it for the year of Anne, but I don't know. I think I want to keep going. I love this book as a kid, and I hoped that I would love it as an adult, and I really do. Again, I keep talking about my age. I know I'm not that old, but it has occurred to me now that I'm actually closer in age to the Cuthberts, Marilla and Matthew, the couple. They're not really a married couple. They're a brother-sister couple. That doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. They're a brother and sister who live together, who adopt Anne Shirley, who is between 11 and I think 16 in this book. And when I first read it, I was about that. I was probably close to 13. I don't remember the exact time I read it. It had to either have been the very late 80s or the very early 90s. And I'm surprised I'm not remembering, but that's fine. But I know I was around that age. So I appreciated that, and I related to Anne in some ways. In some ways I couldn't. I was not an orphan. But, I'm a middle child of 3 sisters. But I loved her crazy imagination, how she would just get carried away. Because that I sort of identified with. Not as much in action, to be honest. She's a lot more demonstrative, I think. And even more chatty than I was and am. I was kind of a quiet kid, but at home I was chatty enough. But like just I was and I am still, but definitely when I was a kid, I was quite the daydreamer. And I identify. So the basic story is this couple, I keep saying couple, it sounds weird, but anyway, this brother and sister live in this house that was kind of a homestead on Prince Edward Island, where I still haven't visited, keep planning to. And they're getting up in years, and they think, it might be good to adopt or get a boy from orphan asylum, they call it, and to help around the farm, the house, etc. And they have someone go and handle the whole process, and this person mistakenly brings back a girl. And so obviously, because it's a series and it's called Anne of Green Gables, which is where they live, they keep her, so that's not really a spoiler. So it's just basically her growing up from being 11 years old and having already been an orphan for some time. Well, actually, since she was quite young, her parents died. Very sad, but to being a little bit silly in a way, because she would forget things that were important, just get carried away in her imagination, get into all kinds of trouble, speak her mind when maybe she shouldn't have, maybe she should have, to becoming a slightly more mature, slightly toned down, but still very much a vivacious, interesting person. And her relationships along the way, which is not just with Marilla and Matthew, but those are very important ones. Marilla, I think, the most important, because Matthew is, you know, he starts out as a very shy person. I think he's always going to be a shy person, but especially around women and females at all, besides his sister. And of course, Anne is a female, so that is a change she has to get used to. But Marilla, I think, is the one who really comes through as someone who makes so much. I don't know if it's progress or just she just blooms in her own weird way, which sounds weird because she's actually getting older as the story gets on, and has health issues as time goes on too. But I don't know. There's something about Marilla that I did not realize as a kid reading that book. I thought of her as such a kind but person, and now I see so many nuances in her, and I just love her. And I love Anne. Still, I love Anne because sometimes I've read books like with Sense and Sensibility, kind of a similar deal where one of the characters is just over the top, and just, in her own kind of world and etc. Marianne, I'm talking about in Sense and Sensibility. And when I read it the second time last year, I kind of didn't relate to her at all anymore. I mean, I understood bits about her, but I didn't relate as much. Whereas Anne, I still kind of do. The difference is, oh my goodness, Anne is just, I don't know. She's just a great character. There are all actually so many great characters in this book. Mrs. Rachel Lynde, who's kind of like the busybody, opinionated neighbor, but she's not a bad person. It's just, so many different little kind of adventures, mini adventures. Gilbert Blythe, which is basically Anne's rival throughout the book because he says something to her early on about her hair. This is another thing that is really a big deal about Anne, is that she is red-haired. A carrot top, if you will, not to her. So she, I don't know what it is about red hair that people have had such prejudices against it, and I know some people still do, and I don't get it. As a kid, I read this book, and I wanted red hair. When I was an adult, I still kind of wanted red hair, but I was happy enough with my blonde hair. When my blonde hair started getting darker and I started seeing grays, I became a redhead for years. And now I'm back to whatever this is that you call it. What do you call it, by the way? Meh? But it's just I couldn't keep up the red hair. But I just love her. I love the characters in here. I love Prince Edward Island and Avonlea. It sounds so beautiful. I grew up and still live in a city. Queens, New York is just not pretty. It has pretty things, obviously. Some people keep nice, front lawns here and there. But it's just, unless you go to Astoria Park, where I'm at, which is not that far, even then, you don't see riots of flowers everywhere and just beautiful places that can have colorful names if you're an imaginative child. And yeah, I almost forgot how gorgeous this place sounded, and just the love of nature, which is something that we lose sometimes living in cities. So it made me appreciate more the need to maybe get out of the city sometimes, and to appreciate nature where I can find it, and to read more about nature as well, which I've been doing. So I think I've talked a lot about Anne of Green Gables, but it's worth talking about. I might talk about it again in future videos this month because it's just great, and it's in keeping with the whole classics challenge, classics community, because it's a children's classic, but to me it's a timeless classic. It was, I think, published in 1908 by Lucy Maud Montgomery, LM, if you will. And this volume is actually a really nice one because it has some definitions in the back of different terms that you hear, and I could have used this when I read it as a preteen, teenager, whatever. I really could have used some of these definitions. I didn't know what, let's see. I didn't know, actually, see, I know these now, so I can't remember. Okay, so I know all these now. Well, I didn't know what take notice was. A notice declaring that a boy and girl were an item, but you kind of could gather it from reading this. Alabaster brow, I did not know that until I was a bit older. This book, also kind of, I don't know, it feels like she's almost like a Pre-Raphaelite character, weirdly enough. So that floats my boat. Some boats don't float in this book very well. Spoiler alert. And there's two recipes. There's two recipes in this book one is for raspberry cordial, which is very fitting for this book, which actually looks like something I can almost make. Huh. And pound cake, another thing that was kind of hilarious in this book, a baking experience that went wrong. There's a lot of different kind of tea parties that happen in the story, which I think, as a young person in my formative tea loving years, was actually a big influence. Now that I think about it, I've forgotten how much tea was in it. I knew there was some, but I didn't realize how much. And that's a very nice herbal tea. Kind of looks like raspberry cordial. Anyway, so I think we've talked a lot about Anne of Green Gables. I can go on forever. I should have just made one video about that. But I'm going to tell you a couple of things I'm in the middle of reading, because that's the only one I finished this week. I mentioned to you guys that I might go on jury duty, and I did for 2 days, and I am glad it's over. I didn't get on a trial. I won't talk about anything there because I don't think I'm supposed to. I don't think it's that important, but I don't think it's my business. I didn't enjoy it very much because it's a very kind of, you don't know what you're going to do. You don't know if you're going to get back to work. I don't like that feeling of not knowing. It's not enough of a fun escape from work. But I figured, okay, I'll have some time to read. And I did to a point, although I kept getting pulled for possible cases and they want you to pay attention to what they were talking about. And I was like, come on, I want to read. So selfish. But I did read 2 books. When I say read, I read in 2 books. I didn't get very far. But, because there were 2 days, I brought two different books. The first day I had brought with me Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. So yeah, this is not a classic. It just came out, I think, last year, but I've been meaning to start it, and I made a little bit of progress. It got to a bit of a point where they're discussing medical procedures, and that's something that does not agree with me. I know it's important. I know whatever vital, but I just in life, but no, thank you. No, thank you. But the story itself is interesting. There was a part in this book, it's pretty early on, where they talk about going to Holland, which is a kind of an expression used for welcome to Holland, basically where someone makes plans in their life that don't work out quite as they anticipated. Sometimes in a way that's terribly tragic, and sometimes in a way that's just disappointing to them or not expected. So like if you booked a trip to Italy and you did all this stuff and you were really looking forward to everything about the aesthetics and the food or whatever of Italy, and then you find yourself coming off the plane and you're in Holland and you're kind of disappointed because this is not what you wanted. But then you learn to enjoy Holland and find out there are a lot of good things there too. And that was mostly in used in reference to, like, say, having children and the child turns out to be autistic and now you have to do a little bit of a detour in your life. So I thought that was an interesting expression. And I thought about it when I was reading Anne of Green Gables, actually, because there's something that happens at one point where she's expecting to do one thing with her life and then something kind of bad, actually pretty bad, happens and she has to change. I don't want to talk about what it is because it's a big spoiler. But I was thinking when I was reading that, I was like, welcome to Holland! I didn't think that when I first read it, obviously. This is very nice tea. I keep saying that. And I also, the other day, because I was sick of reading about medical stuff, took with me Dombey Son, and I made a little more progress. I'm going slow in it, but this is, again, I've said this before, but it's not mean I do not enjoy it. It's just a kind of it has some chapters that go really fast and some that don't. I'm getting to really like the character of Florence, but I also am very interested in young son Dombey, Paul Dombey. He's very odd in his way, and I'm curious to understand what is up with him. So that is cool. Let's see. I am still reading. I'm going to talk about this probably when I do the tea and mystery segment, but this is the mystery that I'm currently reading, and it is technically a classic. It's a mystery classic, so, you know. Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers, and it's an interesting story. I want to know who done it. I haven't figured it out yet, which I'm kind of glad about, because I know some people when they reviewed it said they did. There are things I don't care for about it. I do think it's interesting that this man, Lord Peter Wimsey, is a book collector. He collects antiquarian books, I guess. He has a rare Dante in the beginning of the book that he's acquiring. and that's kind of cool. So I relate to him in that way, except for the fact that I am not moneyed and I only collect books that cost a lot cheaper than that. But that's besides the point. I do like the story. I don't love it yet. I don't know if I will love it. It's hard. The time period. I see it in Agatha Christie, but I see it more in this. The references to certain ethnic groups, etc. Specifically in here, there was someone of a Jewish background, and sometimes it just feels anti-Semitic, and I'm not sure if it's meant to or if that's just how it feels viewing it from this time period. But I'm not in love with that. But even Anne of Green Gables had a moment, because there was a kind of a scene that's a well-known scene where Anne purchases something from a traveling peddler, and Marilla says something to her along the lines of, "Oh, is it one of those Italians?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" I forgot about that entirely. I don't know how I forgot about that. And then she's like, "No, it's a German Jew." And I was like, I don't know why this doesn't feel right. But again, you have to take things as it was written. You know, they say things in Dickens and stuff about women sometimes that you go, yeah. But you have to understand that their times were different, and understand that context, I think. You know, some things are flat out offensive in books, and you have to know when it's too offensive, you know, that it's unacceptable, and sometimes you have to say, okay, this is just that time period. So I think I've said my piece about that. I've read a little bit in Barchester Towers. I haven't gotten very much farther this week, but so far so good. Just a little bit slow. Classics, I'm a little slow anyway. I realize that just these books that I'm reading are not the only books that I'm in the middle of right now, and I think I've said this before. I know some people are not good. A lot of people at BookTube can pull it off, but there are some people that don't understand the deal of reading more than one book at a time, much, you know, how much more so, like, over 5 books at a time. But I always say, I don't know if I've said it here already, but I always say, remember, like, if you're a TV person, whether it's streaming something or network TV that comes on maybe an episode a week or whatever that you're into, you're usually not just watching one. You're usually following a few different stories at least. You know, some people are following like a detective show, or, you know, some British thing. You know, one of those Downton Abbey types. You know, true crime story, documentaries, you know, 'cause I want to throw some nonfiction. I haven't been reading a lot of nonfiction this week. And you know what? People do that, and no one questions the fact that they're following different stories within a month. So why not with books, right? If you can. Again, sometimes if I'm reading too many things that are similar, like I'm reading a couple of books that are Victorian time, I have to make sure that I'm not getting the stories mixed up, because the Dickens and the Trollope, although they write differently, sometimes there are things that happen that can be a little too similar. So you have to learn how to separate. So maybe not overdo the same theme all at once. So if you're watching too many crime procedurals on television, NCIS, CSI, Criminal Minds, Law and Order, I don't know, and you may actually get that confused. So yeah, there's a little bit of a balance there. Now, this is a book that I checked out of the library on a whim, and then I realized that I had read a book last year by the same writer in kind of a response, kind of a comedy, tongue-in-cheek, like this is as well, about Marie Kondo, basically, and just basically the opposite, saying, you know, how to just, you know, leave your stuff all over the place, and don't worry about cleaning, and don't worry about acquiring, it's great, whatever. And it was funny, and obviously if you took it too much to heart, it would be unbalanced and not correct. But it's a kind of a relaxing thing to read something that, you know, when you're dealing with pressures in life, sometimes it's just nice to have something to tell you to chill. So The Joy of Doing Just Enough is a very similar book, and it talks about, what's the word? I think the word is sufficiency, I think. I'm like almost halfway through this book, and it just goes through, I can't find the book. Oh yeah, satisficiency. Because that's, anyway, satisficiency, like in other words, it's satisfyingly enough. Just enough, exactly. And it 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 talks about how people are very into being successful and doing all this stuff and having drive, and sometimes you just can't do everything. So this is kind of like the opposite. Just don't worry about anything. Just do what you have to do, which is obviously not the way one should live, but it's a nice way to, when you're feeling a little pressure, you read something like this, you go from overly ambitious to maybe too unambitious, and you can meet right in the middle. So I'm up to a chapter that is a quiz about what kind of cat are you, which seems quite fitting. It's pretty fun. And of course, this is not a classic either. But I realized that much as I was planning to pretty much read only classics the first 2 weeks of January as the challenge put forth, I also realized sometimes I need to, throw a little variety in there just for my own pleasure. So that's all I've been reading this week so far. Saturday is still a thing, but I hope to make some headway with these. Let me know what you guys have been reading this week. Unless you already wrote it, spoke about it on BookTube, and I will probably have watched it. Who knows? So this is Catherine from Taking... My cat is flipping out over here. This is Catherine from Taking Tea with Catherine. Hope you've had a lovely Friday and have a great weekend.